So, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ashton Bateman. I am a support and education coordinator with the First Link program at the Alzheimer's Society of BC in the North and Central Okanagan. So that's where I am based. And this series of webinars on the theme of care at home is co-presented by Family Caregivers of BC and the Alzheimer's Society of BC. We're both nonprofit organizations who are supported by the BC government in different ways. However, we do not work with the health authority or work for the health authorities or make decisions regarding care services. So today's topic is looking at an area that many caregivers find challenging when providing care, moving from resistance to collaboration. Many of you with us today have maybe already attended all of our Care at Home webinars from this series that's been happening throughout February and March. And this is our final webinar in this short series, and it's designed to build upon the previous topics related to caregivers' personal experiences and practical tips from healthcare providers for safe and dignified care. So in this webinar, we also plan to address the questions we received about those topics. Many of our participants identified providing personal care as a topic requiring more attention. So we've included some examples in today's webinar that demonstrate resistance and opportunities when providing personal care. So I'd also like to acknowledge before we get jumping in that while we're using examples today that relate to dementia, the communication techniques and strategies we discuss apply to all kinds of communication. So not just to communicating with people impacted by dementia. So before I dive into my content, I'd really like to start with asking you all what you're here today to learn. So all of you have kind of been using the chat box already, which is wonderful. So please go ahead and if you haven't already, please feel free to share in the chat what you're here today to learn. What's kind of your top question? And if you're looking for something that I'm not planning to cover today, but fits within this topic, I'll definitely try and squeeze it in. So again, what are your top questions about moving from resistance to collaboration? And while you're typing, I'll just let you know that today we have an hour and a half. So I will be using around the first 60 minutes for the content, so getting through my PowerPoint. And then I'll be going through and focusing on your questions for the remainder. So we will have lots of time to go over them at the end as well. But feel free to pop them in throughout the presentation as they occur to you. So I'm just going to check in with my colleague Lori to see what everyone's been sharing in the chat of what they want to learn today.
Thanks, Ashton. There's a real flurry coming in, and there were some good ones earlier as well. So, how to support my family member in a new diagnosis, which I will put some links into the chat box for that. How do I deal with physically combative behavior? So, a response that is strong resistance. How to not take things personally and not get mad when there is resistance. Overcoming an absolute refusal to do something, and that got a thumbs up. So, it clearly is one that resonates. Gentle support around resistance towards personal hygiene, screaming or shrieking to support someone is supporting their mother who is in turn supporting their father. How to stop obsessive compulsive behavior, how to promote personal hygiene. Um, those kinds of questions, many of which I know are already going to be covered.
Thanks so much, Lori. Yeah, and thank you all for sharing your questions. And I am really hoping to provide you all with some good information and then some strategies to respond. And these can apply to lots of different caregiving situations, whether it's something that's happening every day or maybe a few times a week, like bathing or hygiene. So thank you all for sharing that. And like I said, please feel free to continue sharing your questions. We'll definitely be coming back to them if they haven't been covered in today's content. So please feel free to continue sharing. And thanks again, Lori. So caregivers often share how frustrating it is when you want to do the very best for your person you're supporting, but your person just doesn't seem to want to cooperate. Today we'll be exploring a bit why dementia might be behind some of the resistance and how understanding it a bit more, understanding dementia and behavior a bit more might help you to see these responses in a different light. So to put it in a different way, both resistance and collaboration are behaviors that are simply ways of responding. And so today we're going to explore some of the factors that may influence the way both we and the person we are caring for might respond. So for our session overview today, we're going to look at what is resistance and how might dementia be influencing behavior? What other things might be influencing us? How to observe behaviors and use them as a guide for you to create new and different strategies when providing care. We'll be looking at a three-step communication process to help caregivers learn valuable communication strategies when responding to behaviors, specifically those situations that aren't cooperative or collaborative. We're also going to briefly touch on caregiver wellness and self-care. And although I'd love to spend more time on this topic, we only have so much time today, but we will be providing some more resources on that in the helpful resources document. So at the end of the day, there is no caregiving without a caregiver. And it's imperative that caregivers learn how to protect and maintain their own health and well being. And finally, I'll be sharing a little bit about the role of the Alzheimer's Society of BC and Family Caregivers of British Columbia. So perhaps the most important place to start is with the understanding that all behaviors have a reason, a cause, and a meaning, whether dementia is involved or not. If the light is too bright in your eyes, you might squint and turn away. If a sound is too loud or unpleasant, you might flinch or leave the room. Or, as I'm sure many parents in today's audience will identify with, you might yell out, "Would you turn that down?" So, when someone responds in a way that we interpret as resistance, it could be that the person is trying to tell you something that they can't articulate because of changes in their brain have reduced communication abilities. So, for example, someone may be trying to say, "I'm feeling frustrated, I'm scared, or this is confusing," and it may come out as resistance or distress. The person may be trying to tell you that they need something, but they're having difficulty saying what it is they need. So, for example, they may be trying to say, "I feel cold in the bathroom," or "the sound of the shower is deafening." But that may be far too complex for someone with cognitive impairment to process, let alone articulate. The behavior itself may also be a way of meeting a need as opposed to expression of an unmet need. For example, the person may be pacing the hall to expend some energy on a day that they couldn't get outside for a walk. And of course, changes in behavior or responses can be related to physical or structural changes in the brain. So, for example, if we see apathy or withdrawal, that can be due to changes in the neurotransmitters. Lack of motivation could be due to structural changes in the frontal lobe. People living with dementia don't behave in uncharacteristic ways on purpose. They're doing the best what they are doing the best they can with what they have. And they're trying to manage that situation and maybe experiencing challenges in communicating or responding appropriately. So we always need to keep that in mind as well. There's been a historical tendency to use the term challenging behaviors because, of course, we do find them challenging. But that's not a person centered way of looking at responses, nor does that term acknowledge that all of us respond to stimuli. So let's consider that underlying the idea of moving from resistance to collaboration is understanding that the term responsive behaviors is used to clearly identify that actions, words, and gestures are a response that expresses something important. So think of stimulus and response. And when considering the definition of responsive behaviors, we recognize that this is the term preferred by people living with dementia. We all know that sometimes it can be difficult to manage negative or uncomfortable feelings, and that is especially true when we find ourselves in a situation that causes anxiety, fear, grief, pain, change, or loss. Dementia affects how a person responds. Many responsive behaviors are a result of changes in the brain that affect how an event is perceived, the emotions triggered, the ability to make sense of the event, and the response itself. So, all these reactions are managed by the brain. And with dementia, we cannot fix the brain damage associated with it, but we can adjust our response as people caring for those living with dementia or as caregivers in general. And the first step to managing our own responses and to support and understand the experience of the person we're supporting is to try and understand the meaning of the response. So let's take a step back and consider the physical, emotional, and environmental elements that could be contributing to these behaviors. So it's important to note as well that while I'm talking about this in the context of dementia, the strategies and some of the responses are likely familiar to many caregivers. Behavioral symptoms are also very individual and can change from day to day, week to week, etc. So, not everyone with dementia experiences all the changes we're going to talk more about. And although it's hard, try not to take the person's behaviors personally. People with dementia don't behave in an uncharacteristic way on purpose. These are symptoms of the disease in the brain. They are doing the best what they can with the cognitive abilities that they have, even if it doesn't appear that way. They're not doing it on purpose to irritate you. And if you haven't already seen our Understanding Dementia videos, I encourage you to particularly look at the brain and dementia segment. So, this video can help you to understand the effect that dementia is having on the brain and how those brain changes affect the person you're caring for. So, the playlist for that is linked in our helpful resources document. So, again, looking at that video to understand the specific changes that are happening so we can really understand, okay, this is what my person is going through on the back end. I need to empathize and meet them where they're at. So, while trying to identify what might be triggering the responsive behavior, it's also important to consider the person's physical well being. Sometimes a responsive behavior can arise when a person is in pain or not feeling well. So try to look for signs of physical illness or injury that could be affecting behavior. So this could be anything from pain from arthritis to a UTI or a fever that the person isn't articulating to us. A healthy brain that can identify a problem and communicate it. So, for example, if we have a headache, a healthy brain will prompt us to get up, go to the kitchen, and get that glass of water and take the Tylenol or Advil. However, a brain with dementia will not necessarily connect the dots in this situation. And so we see a responsive behavior as a result. Perhaps it's irritation or anger, or it could be excessive sleeping, or maybe even a surprising amount of tears. So when we're attempting to understand what a person's behavior may be telling us, we need to consider all of the variables that may be affecting the ability to respond appropriately. So we also have a recording called Understanding Behavior, and it goes into depth into a lot of the strategies to use for understanding why those behaviors are happening. And this one is linked in our helpful resources as well. So reframing how we perceive a behavior can help us to better understand why it's occurring and how to respond. So I've got a quote on the screen from Tom Kitwood, who is the author of Dementia Reconsidered. And he says, when the emphasis is on the person, behavior is not seen as a problem to be managed, but rather actions and expressions that need to be understood. So instead of seeing the behavior as a challenge, let's look at it as an opportunity to connect. And when we stop to consider the person, who they are, what they enjoy, what their life history is, it becomes easier to make this connection. So you may already be familiar with the 5 W's: what, where, when, who, and why. And by stepping back from the behavior and the emotions that can be triggered in us and using these 5 W's with curiosity can help us look for patterns that might reveal what the person is trying to communicate. So the emotions are high when these behaviors are happening. So it can be tricky to step back, but using the 5 W's is a way where we can kind of become a detective into what's really going on when this behavior is happening. So let's go through the 5 W's. What is going on? Is this a behavior something that we want to change or that needs to change? Is anyone in danger when this behavior is happening? Where is it happening? Is it always happening in the same place? Is the environment scary, confusing, uncomfortable? Maybe it's too loud or too busy. Can things be changed in the environment, or can the place be avoided? When is it happening? Is it always a certain time of day or when a particular noise happens? It also may be an indication of the person's energy level at that particular time of day. Maybe they're just exhausted. Does the person think that they should be doing something else? So maybe they think they need to be going to work. Maybe it depends where they're at in that reality. Who is involved? Is it you as the family, as a caregiver, or is it staff? People with dementia may find certain individuals difficult to deal with because of a past memory or maybe even their voice level. And this last one's a big one, the why. So, why is this behavior happening? Is there a certain trigger? What happened just before? What happened earlier that day? Is it task related? Are they having trouble completing a task that they used to be able to do easily? Or is it physical? So, like I talked about, there may be something physical happening. It could even be an unmet need like hunger or thirst. Maybe they need to go to the bathroom. So, the why is a big one. And we'll talk about more strategies for understanding this and responding. And these are the 5 W's that we're looking at when we're really investigating what's going on and why a behavior is occurring. So, by problem solving why behaviors occur, we can better strategize ways to respond. And we have to remember it's about us, not them, in terms of who can change and adapt. It's about us. So, take a deep breath, pause, and think, what's going on here? Be a detective and always ask yourself, so what? And this is meaning, what would happen if I ignore this behavior? If the answer is nothing, then perhaps it's not a behavior that needs to be changed. So we need to consider whether there are any safety risks to the person or others, and also if it's imposing on the person's dignity, like disrobing in public. So who is the behavior affecting? Is it affecting me or them? And I'll go into a few examples now to kind of illustrate how we approach these initial questions. So my first example is that I'm caring for my mom, Joan, who has started to wear clothing that is rather out of character. As you can see from the photo, Joan is choosing to wear some bright neon casual clothing. The issue is Joan wears the same outfit everywhere, every day, to the grocery store, to church, out for a walk. Sometimes she wants to sleep in the outfit. I'm not comfortable with this outfit. It's embarrassing, especially at church service. People stare at Joan, but she thinks they're admiring her style. So we can put this problem to the test by using those three questions on the screen that I was reviewing. So, what is happening? Joan wears the same outfit over and over again. And Joan's behavior and comments indicate that she's happy and comfortable wearing this outfit. She feels good. Is it a behavior that needs to be changed? Probably, but not every day. So, this behavior needs to be addressed, of course, when it becomes a safety concern. So, if Joan is wearing dirty clothes, the clothing may be soiled inside or out. That is a problem because there's a risk of infection. So, now we move into the so what. So, what if Joan wears this outfit everywhere? It's a problem for me as a family member because I'm embarrassed about this outfit. But if I weigh my options, I would prefer to have a happy Joan in the neon pants rather than an unhappy and resentful Joan in slacks and a cardigan. And again, it is a problem if the clothing is soiled. So I need a backup plan. And that backup plan is probably to get a second pair of those neon pants. So she has two to choose from with a clean outfit ready to go. So we're getting creative and figuring out how we can adapt our behavior to suit Joan's preferences here. So we're working with that behavior so it isn't escalating and causing more discomfort for her. And now I have a bit of a different example. So what if a person is consistently hiding their medication? Again, let's look at what's going on and whether this is a behavior that needs to be changed. So in this case, there is a safety risk. And if I ignore it, the person may continue to not take their medications, which is a safety risk to start. And then they could also find a pile of pills later on and take them all at once. So this could be a really dangerous situation. So I'm going to turn to everyone in the chat box. So looking at this example, um, how could we adapt how we respond to this? So feel free to write in the chat box any suggestions that you would have. So if the person you're caring for starts hiding their medication, how can we respond and make it more safe and adapt in this situation? So I'll give it a second or two and then I'll get Lori to share some of the suggestions. And it's so great when all of you are sharing things in the chat box because this is the reality of caregiving. We do have to get creative. So we really appreciate when you're able to share your thoughts. And maybe this is something you've already encountered in your caregiving journey. So Lori, please feel free to let me know if anyone's shared any suggestions.
Absolutely. Um, One of the first ones that came in was blister packs. Someone suggests maybe hiding the medication in the food, maybe being there to give medication, or if you live in the same place, spouse or a family member takes over giving the pills. Maybe suggest using a weekly pill dispenser. Find out if the pills are too large to swallow, and so maybe cut them. Make sure that you take with the meal. Um, Preempt by getting medications ready. Uh, 10 minutes or so prior from the blister pack. So kind of a blending of blister pack and someone else supporting. Pill box with days of the week marked on it. So kind of personal blister pack in a way. Put the pills out earlier and keep joking about them to reduce resistance. So whole variety of things.
Wow, thank you so much, Lori. And thank you all. Like those are really great examples. And the key with caregiving is that you need to find what works for you and your person. So all of those are really great suggestions. So I heard, one of them being, so keep the medication in your possession as the caregiver. So maybe you always kept them out in the open. Maybe that's not a safe option now. So keeping them in with you in your possession, staying with the person while they take it. So Um, we in the previous webinar, we actually had someone, one of the healthcare providers from Fraser Health, talked about something called the royal we. So offering to do things together. So let's take our medication. We are going to take our meds. We are ready to take a shower this morning. So using that as kind of adding that into the routine and making it more gentle instead of saying you have to take these medications. I heard someone mention that maybe they're having trouble swallowing the pill. So for sure, that's definitely an option. So talk to your pharmacist to see what the options are. If maybe they're finding it too difficult to swallow, maybe there's a bad taste to the pill, etc. Maybe they would prefer to have it with juice instead of water. And I'll just mention, if medications continue to be a problem, definitely consider contacting your local health authority for support. And in terms of home care, please keep in mind that it can be layered. So meaning it can be added on as dementia progresses. So support with medications is simply one layer of care to help the person continue living at home safely for a long period of time. So thank you again, everyone, for sharing those suggestions. And this is just the reality of some situations that we can see as these changes are happening.
Couple of things that I really, really liked. Um, there's someone who shared about the days of the week on the pill container. She and her person fill those together. So they sit down together. It provides her mom with some decision making and power if she feels empowered as she's filling them. And we make pill taking time a nice time to visit with each other. So for some people, like that's a lovely solution. And somebody else says, I pour out the medications myself on the table, making sure that the table doesn't blend with the color of the medication. And it also reminds me of my own medications to take and remind him to take them. And so again, they're doing it collaboratively.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And we always talk about with caregiving, involving them in as much as possible. So using their remaining abilities, they can still sort and do those things. So this is a great activity. So using the we instead of the you. So we are doing this. So it's a collaboration. So we're moving from that resistance to collaboration. So that is a really great example. Thank you so much for adding that in, Lori. So this is a lot of information. And I mean, being a caregiver is a lot of change and you're constantly adapting. So you may be feeling a little bit overwhelmed with all the information that you're trying to absorb. And there are a lot of questions to consider. And for some of you, you're reframing these situations and it's a brand new idea. So let's just take a deep breath and reflect on how you're feeling in this moment because this is a lot of information. So just take a second and let's practice doing a deep breath. And we're giving you lots of information today, and only some of it you might find relevant to you in your situation. So it is completely normal to feel a bit anxious or overwhelmed with this. And we're going to be looking at some strategies on when these behaviors are happening, how we can respond. So the first strategy that we are going to talk about is to breathe. And many caregivers have shared with us that it's vital to slow down in times of stress, to take a moment and to pause before addressing or responding to a situation. The process of stopping before reacting can help you respond in a more calm and compassionate way. It can be as simple as taking a couple of deep breaths before responding. We've had care partners tell us over and over again that they learn to choose their battles. So, consciously pausing and deciding whether or not to take action. You can act from a more calm and centered place after pausing and taking some deep breaths. The pause can help you remember to speak slowly and calmly because it's not only what we say, it's how we say it. We can often soften the tone of our voice. We can take our time. We can check our body language and adjust our posture and position. And while breathing is simple, we do it all the time, we're not in any way saying that learning to stop and take a couple of breaths is easy. Finding the time to take the pause takes practice. So, that being said, if you are practicing it regularly, it can become part of your normal. So it can be comfortable and may even start to feel like a moment of refuge and safety before heading out into the storm. So now that we've learned that so what technique when looking at a behavior, we're ready to shift into some basic communication strategies. The way we communicate through words, body language, and tone of voice can really help us develop a more collaborative approach with a person living with dementia or the person you're caring for. So, although the behaviors we observe are usually complex and varied, we have three helpful communication strategies that can support moving from resistance to collaboration. So, having these three broad categories makes it a bit easier to remember them. So, when we're trying to understand the why behind a behavior, there's a lot of factors, but with responding, these three communication strategies are a bit easier to remember. So, let's take a look at them. So, first off is identify the emotion. What feelings are they experiencing? Do they sound worried, happy, excited, upset, maybe even scared? Be observant and be curious. And take the time to understand how the person with dementia is feeling and what they need might be or what they need at that moment. So they might be expressing that through a behavior. So this example that I have on the screen is focusing on personal care in the bathroom. And that's always a tricky one. Bathrooms, water, and mirrors can all be quite confusing and overwhelming for a person living with dementia. So it's common that we see fear and resistance. So after looking at the emotion, let's validate the emotion, even if it seems inappropriate or out of character. Validate it. How this looks will depend on the emotion being expressed. So, for example, if the emotion is worry, you might say something like, it sounds like you're unhappy about taking a shower, or it seems like you're worried about taking a shower. So, provide your full attention when offering validating statements. Eye contact is very important. And accompanying your comments with a gentle touch, if appropriate, can really help turn the person's attention away from the thought and towards you instead. And think about a time, for example, when you've been worried, scared, anxious, or confused. You don't want to be dismissed. You want acceptance and validation that what you're feeling makes sense. So if someone is refusing to have a shower or something like that, they don't want to hear, well, it's time for your shower. Let's go do it. We need to take a gentler approach. So, validating whatever emotion they're feeling before that shower. So, with something like this, we may need to try and avoid using logic or reasoning. Thinking skills won't work with anyone with heightened emotions, whether that person has dementia or not. So, validate the person by putting yourself in their reality. And in our example above, we could continue the validation and reassurance by saying, I remember the shower blasted cold water last time and that was unpleasant. Can I help you test the temperature first this time? Or in another example, maybe the person is upset that they have to change their dirty clothes, for example. Validate their reality and say, yes, I can see you're unhappy about changing your clothes. I know you love this shirt, rather than correcting them and explaining the situation with, well, these clothes are dirty. You made a mess all over the shirt, and it's time to get it into the laundry and get you in the shower. Remember to connect, not correct. So, and then the third is to distract or redirect. Distraction and redirection can be successful after taking sufficient time to validate emotions and respond empathetically. Sometimes we're in a rush and we want to jump directly to this step and offer all sorts of distractions, change the subject, and move on. But the validation is key. It gives the brain a chance to share its reality, its worries, and it prepares it to switch gears. So once you've validated the person's emotional reality and what it is they're feeling, we can then move on and redirect the person's attention to something else. So, for example, after our shower, let's treat ourselves to tea and cookies, or let's watch a movie, or call the grandkids. So there's a reward after the shower in this case. And this is where it really becomes important to use your knowledge of the person to respond in the way that would make sense to them. So, what about their life history or their likes and dislikes could you draw on? And if you're finding it difficult to redirect the person after you've already validated their emotional reality, maybe nothing seems to be working and they're saying, nope, I don't want to. Nope. You can try maybe changing the environment. So sometimes moving to another room or going for a short walk or a drive can make all the difference. And with this case with the shower, it might be that it may work at a different time or it might be another day. So again, choosing your battles. So, what is their reality? It can be really helpful to think of it this way: we have our reality, and the person with dementia has theirs. And as the disease progresses, our shared reality will become smaller and smaller. So, are we trying to bring the person back into our reality, or are we willing to meet them where they're at in theirs? It may feel like fibbing, but responding with empathy and validating what it is that they're experiencing, so validating their reality, is fundamentally different from lying to the person because of the motivation behind it. We're not trying to fool them or trick them to get something for ourselves. Instead, we're trying to step into their reality because we're aware of the changes in their brain and we're trying to provide comfort and support. And at the end of the day, when this is the case, kindness is more important than the truth. So it can be helpful to keep a record of, the 5 W's that I talked about and how you responded. So you can look back and see what was successful and repeat it and what was not, so you can try something else. So remember who was involved in the behavior, who was around when it happened, what might be causing it, and going back to, is this a behavior that needs to be changed? When is it happening? Where is it occurring? And why? So, keeping a record of these things, having a journal even, can help you see the patterns and develop a range of coping strategies. The reality is that this is new for you. Your loved one is behaving in these uncharacteristic ways that you're not accustomed to. So you're learning, and it's like keeping notes for a test. So having that journal to refer to and thinking, okay, well, when this happened last week, I tried this and it worked really well. Let's try it again. Because at the end of the day, as a caregiver, you're very busy and you're trying to keep up with all of this. So having that journal or record of these can be super helpful. And it can also help you to better identify under which circumstances one strategy works better than another. So let's look at this example using that 3 step communication process I went over. So we're understanding that dementia is a brain disease, and someone whose brain has been damaged by dementia cannot make the changes necessary to join our reality, but we can make the necessary changes to validate what is real to them and theirs. So in this example, when Frida wants to go home to the farm and see her mom, it's distressing and painful to remind her that her mom's been dead for 30 years. So, what we think of what Frida needs in that moment is reassurance that she's going to see someone who loves her and be in a place that's reassuring. So, when Frida comes up and she's wanting to go home to the farm and see her mom, the first thing we want to do in that communication is identify the emotion behind the story. So, What feelings do you think Frida is experiencing? What do you think is behind her desire to see her mom? So be observant and be curious in this situation and think about how Frida is feeling and what she might be expressing. So we're going back to our 3 steps. So we identify that emotional reality. And now let's look at validating her emotions. So it simply isn't helpful to bring Frida into my reality when mom died 30 years ago, especially if this is something that she is coming back to frequently. I don't want to keep reminding her of that. So listen for cues that can give you words to respond, like saying, "Oh, I'd love to go with you. What would we see on the farm?" Or, "Your mom sounds like an amazing person. What's one of your favorite memories with her?" And always remembering that connect, not correct. So these responses are supporting Frida's emotional reality in that moment and speak to what might be the needs behind her statement, which would be a sense of love and security. And lastly, distract or redirect. So you may say something like, "Yes, we'll go see your mom soon, but let's have lunch first." So, like I said with the previous examples, using your knowledge of that person to know what they like and what will be a successful way to distract or redirect them. So, this was just an example with a specific person. And we hear this one a lot, the wanting to go home or wanting to see a relative who has already passed away. So I'd like to turn back to all of you and feel free to put in the chat box if you have any examples of how to reassure and redirect someone. So please share your ideas or even your experience. So is there something that's worked for you, or what do you think would work in your situation? So again, we went over that example with Frida. Do you have anything that's worked in your situation already, or now that we've kind of gone through some of these strategies, what kind of ideas do you have? So I'll give you a second to start typing in the chat box, and I'll go back to Lori to see what's been being said. And I'm just going to share one example before I dive into your examples. One thing that we say to try a lot is agreeing with the person rather than arguing. Arguing with a person living with dementia is really a lose-lose situation. And agreeing will really help ease the frustration for both of you and will prevent escalation of the behavior. So, with Frida's example, saying something like, "Yes, I really want to see mom too," or "It feels like it's been a long time since I saw you as well. I'm really glad to see you." So, agreeing with their reality rather than arguing. So, I'm going to go back to Lori. If has anyone been typing any strategies in the chat box for how they've tried reassuring or redirecting?
Nothing specific yet coming in, but it is interesting. Somebody asked specifically for strategies for something that I've not heard of called capgras syndrome, which
Mm,
is, I just thank you, Google. I realized it's something that is an imposter syndrome or believing that someone has been taken and replaced by a duplicate. It doesn't really matter, but the important thing is that the exact strategies that you just talked about are really the same strategies in dealing with that. So enter their realm of reality, avoid arguing or try to correct them. Help them feel safe. So, understanding what it is that they might be afraid of. Um, if you're unsure, ask the person what they need, acknowledge their feelings. So, and obviously, there are some specific things so that you'll need to talk to someone who's an expert about that. But I just thought it really underlined how important it is, the strategies that we are sharing. And now people
mhm,
are uh, Yeah. Someone says, when my loved one talks about someone who's passed, I generally start talking in a positive way about that person as though they are in the here and now. It's hard to redirect when the other person is jumping off onto tangents. By the time you've got your redirecting target, the other person is already throwing a new curveball at you. And
Yeah.
I am sure that there are others um, in the group today that could appreciate. Um, Agree and compliment. You're such a good daughter. I really appreciate your devotion to your mother. My husband had a UTI recently and was hallucinating, sitting on the bed talking to his father, who had died in 1979. I gave him a breakfast smoothie and he said, I already tasted it, Daddy. And I told him, yes, but Daddy wants you to finish it. He took it and drank the whole thing. So lovely example.
Yeah.
Um, And someone then says the person with dementia is very aware of her disease, so likely a small minority, but all the strategies you mentioned won't work for her because she knows immediately what I'm trying to do.
Yes.
It it also that raises that really good point that not everything has a solution or has a solution in that moment. And sometimes it's just enough to say, I I can appreciate that this is very frustrating. I find it scary. I find it frustrating, or I can only imagine how you must be feeling. I wish I had an answer. Sometimes just coming alongside the person is enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Meeting them where they're at is the key here. And thanks, Lori, for all those examples. And like I said, we're giving these strategies and information, and it may not be applicable to everyone, and it may not be applicable in the present either, depending on where you're at with the disease, but it may be in the future. So maybe you can bookmark it and save it for later if it does become relevant. But yeah, really, it's about meeting the person where they're at, whether they are needing you to just sit and empathize with them or validate their emotions, etc. So thank you all for sharing those examples and what you've tried um, with your person. And another one that I'll just mention before I move on is, and this can be a tricky one, is accepting blame if you have to. So even if you didn't do something, the person with dementia may be feeling unsure themselves. So taking that blame can help ease their anxiety and uncertainty. So, an example may be, I'm sorry, Dad, I should have washed your shirt earlier on, but I forgot. So, and we're assuring them that it will be okay. So, taking it on yourself, so accepting that blame so it's not on them when they're feeling anxious or unsure. And in terms of this as well, is the behavior related to an unmet need for comfort or safety and security? A person may be feeling insecure about something or simply in need of comfort from a person they trust, which would be you if you're caring for them. So, another example of this would be, I know you like the water to be warm. I will be in control of the temperature and it will be okay. We can do this together. So, again, adding in that we as well can be really helpful. So, thank you all again for sharing your examples in the chat. It's really great to hear some of those strategies and just your insight. So I'm getting near the end of my content, and of course, we're going to leave time for questions. And I want to share this quote from Arne Gerborg. So, to love a person is to learn the song that is in their heart and to sing it to them when they have forgotten. Behavior is communication and an opportunity to connect with the person living with dementia or the person you're caring for. We may not always respond the way we would like to in the moment, but it's your intentions that are important. No one goes into this as a perfect caregiver, nor are you expected to be. It can be challenging to cope with these behaviors and keep up with the changes. And as caregivers, It's very important to take time to care for yourself so you have the ability to be the patient caregiver you want to be. I was just doing a workshop the other day and we were talking about, trying to stay positive and how difficult it can be. But someone in the audience had said, even when I have a good night's sleep, I find I'm more positive and patient the next day. So maybe it means getting a good night's sleep or using that breathing technique that we talked about earlier, taking a breath. So the reality is that being a caregiver is hard, but you're not in it alone. And if you're interested in connecting with other caregivers and sharing experiences as you have today in the chat box, you can connect with Family Caregivers of BC for a variety of caregiver support groups or call our First Link Dementia Helpline for information on dementia caregiver support groups. Behavior isn't isolated. All of us behave in response to environment, communication, and stressors. So, like I said earlier, we're thinking of stimuli and response. A person with dementia has a disease that is causing damaging changes to their brain. And because of these brain changes, we cannot teach a person with dementia how to change their behavior. This is not something they can control. The person with dementia may not even be aware they're acting in a certain way, for example, repeating questions over and over. What we can do as caregivers is learn new strategies for adapting how we respond and cope with these changes in behavior. We can meet the person with dementia where they're at by adapting the environment when we can and adapting how we communicate, managing our own level of stress and how we respond, and engaging with them in activities that are meaningful to who they are. And all of this supports a person to function at their optimum level. As caregivers, we need to look at the bigger picture of wellness that includes us and try to remain healthy and build resilience. Both Family Caregivers of BC and Alzheimer's Society of BC have resources and supports to help caregivers. And today's Helpful Resources document has links to both organizations. So please feel free to check that out. And Laurie's posted that in the chat box throughout the presentation. So we've gone through quite a bit today, and I just want to do a little summary of the key learnings before we dive into a little bit of our Q&A portion. So we talked about the physical changes that are taking place in the brain and how those changes make it difficult for someone to process change and stress. Dementia's physical brain changes can cause communication barriers that may result in responsive behavior. But we have those tools available to us, the 5 W's, the what, where, when, who, why, observing and recording those facts as we see them happening with behavior. And we have the 3-step communication tool. So identifying the emotion, validating the emotion, and then moving on to distract and redirect. And finally, we also have the pause or that breath as a technique to help calm and focus. So today we've asked you to learn a tremendous amount of information, and we want to acknowledge that caregivers need care too, and taking care of yourself is crucial as you learn these skills and continue to provide the compassionate care that you do. And yeah, I just want to remind you that you have support. You have others who are going through the exact same thing as you, and you have us, the Alzheimer's Society of BC and Family Caregivers of BC. So I'm going to put up this final slide before we dive into our question and answer portion. And Laurie, I'll turn to you and see if there's any questions so far that we could address.
There are a lot of questions and situations more.
Okay.
And I just want to thank everyone for sharing so openly because, as much as Ashton and I provide information and response, it's it's you as fellow caregivers who provide such incredible insight. And so thank you for sharing so openly and do continue to ask questions. I'm just going to kind of work my way backwards.
Mhm.
And someone says, she asks, I don't know what to do when we're not doing anything. So I'm guessing that this person is talking about the person that they are caring for has kind of a repetitive, I don't know what to do. And I was thinking that it might be a good one if we go and look at the five W's and look at the three strategies that looking at this or any of the examples might be helpful. So if we look back at the five W's, um, thinking about what's going on, and in this case, the person is saying, "I I don't know what to do." So then perhaps thinking about, is it happening? So when is it happening at a particular time of day? For example, often early evening, late afternoon, for some reason, often with people with dementia, that's a time of day when um, often in previous lives, people were very busy. If people worked in an office, that's often the time of day when you're wrapping up your work and heading home. If someone was a stay-at-home parent, that might be the time of day that kids are coming home and meals are getting planned. It's often a transition time, and as a result, it may be that that time of day is contributing to that restless feeling. Not knowing what to do could be an expression, as Ashton shared in today's presentation. It could be an expression of a way that she's feeling unsure. Everything is changing, perhaps because of things that are happening in her brain. And she doesn't know how to say what she's feeling. And so she says, I don't know what to do. Um, Ashton, do you want to kind of keep going on that? And I'm going to dig through some more questions.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So it can depend on, yeah, time of day. So being that detective and figuring out what's going on. So what changes is that person going through? And you know your person best. So yeah, it could be a certain time of day, and then looking at how we can respond to validate the emotions with that. And it could be that they're getting more tired. Dementia is a disease where they're keeping up with a lot of the changes that are happening in the brain. So they may be feeling more tired at certain times of the day. That may result in behaviors. It could be something physical going on. And another thing is that people need a change in routine. Like we need to adapt and figure out what kind of routine will be working best for that person. So trying new things, getting creative, and like Lori said, looking back at those five W's of the when, why is it happening, who's involved, and the so what kind of thing. So, working with your knowledge of the person to help respond to that.
Mm, sorry, someone just said thank you for not telling us to take a walk or a bubble bath or put on our own oxygen masks first. Most of us are multitasking 14 things at once. There isn't time to breathe. By the time I have time to call a helpline, it's 2 a.m.
Yeah, caregiving is a 24-hour job, and everyone finds different ways of seeking that refuge of whether it's a quick breath in between, caring for your person or just those little things and just doing whatever you can to treat yourself. And but yeah, it's not always the reality to get out of your house and spend time alone. That's not the reality for a lot of caregivers. So we have to be realistic and talk about what's going to work for you individually. So just like every person living with dementia is different, every caregiver is different too, and every day is going to look different. So you kind of have to take it day by day and just try and take care of yourself and put yourself first whenever you can, because we always try and reiterate that it's not easy because it isn't. Caregiving is very hard. So, and you're not alone, as I'm sure you're seeing in the chat box. There's lots of others going through something similar, which can also be helpful to hear.
I'm actually going to toss this to the group. Um,
Mm.
Someone has asked actually a couple of times, how do I deal with my mom's physically combative behavior and tantrums? And I'm wondering, we have a fairly large group of caregivers here in the chat today. Have any of you got experience with that? Um, and for those of you, if for those of you who we don't address your situation today, please do connect with the Alzheimer's Society of BC or the Family Caregivers of BC, recognizing that for some of you it is 2 a.m. and our helplines won't be open. So but when you're looking for very specific situations like um, that may not be something that we can address in a more generic webinar. But yeah, I'm wondering if anybody else has any suggestions for how you deal with physically combative responses. One thing I would suggest is to talk to a doctor, a nurse, an occupational therapist. And the previous session last week um, that had to do with providing physical care at home, there were a number of links in that to different occupational therapists, physiotherapists who may be able to give you some guidance in terms of physical ways that you can keep yourself safe while responding.
Yeah, yeah, it is tricky to address the really unique and specific situations on our webinars, but with situations like this, and I would encourage you, I mentioned, and it's in our helpful resources, the understanding behavior video. We really go in depth into figuring out what's going on. So, is it something physical going on? So, looking at, is it pain? Is it a UTI? Is it a fever? So, looking for those trends in the behavior. Is it environmental? Is it happening in the same spot every day? Or maybe there's something that's causing them to respond in that manner. Um, yeah, so we need to look at all of those factors, and it can be a lot to look at. And I think I said the word a few times today, being a detective. So, although when you're in that situation, it's really tricky to be like, let me just think of the millions of things it could be. But sitting with your person and trying to figure out, what's going on. And yeah, you can talk to your doctor as well to maybe rule out other things that are going on as well, because we do often see with certain behaviors, if it's something new or it came on very suddenly, it could be delirium, which is different from dementia. So it is so personal. So we do encourage you, yeah, to connect with us for all of your really specific situations so we can dive into that. But yeah, it is so unique for everyone, and everyone's situation is so different. But hopefully, the strategies that we're giving and the resources you can take home and use and have ready for those kinds of situations.
Ashton, somebody's asking if you can put up the slide with the 5 W's again.
Yeah, this is a really great one to kind of have as, like I said, having that journal and having this as a reference. So it looks like a lot to go through, but it can really help break down rather than just going in it open, just having these specific things to look at so we can decipher what may be going on.
Yeah, somebody's saying caregivers need a support group hour on Zoom. And I will just say that both Family Caregivers of BC and Alzheimer's Society of BC do have online support groups. So I encourage you to reach out and connect with either organization. Obviously, for dementia specific support, it may be that a Alzheimer's Society support group might give you more options. That isn't necessarily the case. So please do reach out to either organization. Um, and for those who are not looking for a Zoom support group, they do. I know Alzheimer's Society has in-person support groups as well. Um, Somebody shares North Shore Caregivers Group also has a monthly support group. So there are support groups around. The person is saying, somebody else says, and the slide for the 3 strategies too.
They're all really great, almost a mantra to have of reminding you in those situations. But yeah, Lori will be providing a copy of the slides. But if you're looking, so I know some people like taking a screenshot, so maybe you want to have it right on your phone there or something. So I'll leave this up. I was just taking a look at the chat box as well, and wow, it's just so great to see everyone participating so actively today. So
Someone asked, does music help with mood? And
yeah.
I think there's lots and lots of research around that.
Yeah, music is one of the ones, as someone with dementia maybe loses their ability to communicate or express themselves, music is one of those universal things. I used to work in recreation and long-term care, and music is something that sticks with someone for life. It's something that's always there. So if you know your person loves a certain type of music and they're having a bad day, that can be a really great technique for distraction or redirection, or even to just, yeah, improve their mood. That's, yeah, a great point. I saw a question, Lori. I hope it's okay if I just jump right
Hmm.
in.
Please.
I saw Selena asked about how important it is to let mom sleep throughout the day and not sleep at night. So this can be behaviors can definitely arise. I've heard of people, waking in the night. And this one comes up a lot in terms of when we should let them sleep or if it is important. So, sleep is, of course, important for everyone to function. So, we want our loved one to be getting regular sleep. So, I think the best way to approach this one would be to try and maintain as much of a routine as possible. If you're finding, and it is quite common for people living with dementia to wake in the night, and maybe they're getting a bit restless. Um, if that does happen, trying to just approach them calmly and redirect them rather than letting them stay up at night, but you do have to choose your battles, of course. Another thing we could maybe recommend for that is to try and keep them as active as possible during the day and allowing time for rest, but knowing kind of what amount of rest during the day would be sufficient instead of having too much rest during the day. So that may cause them to be up at night. So, or even one thing could be to, of course, it's important to keep hydrated, but if it's later in the day and they're maybe trying to reduce fluids near bedtime, that can reduce the amount of getting up in the night for any of us, of course, but it's just something we don't really think about sometimes if that does become an issue of them waking and not getting enough sleep. So hopefully that helps answer your question. I'm just going to bump ahead in my slides again, if that's okay. While you look for any other questions, Lori.
Yeah, someone asked about early on about supporting someone who has a new diagnosis. And I we have a recording on that called Responding to a Diagnosis. There's also a section on that recorded on our recorded videos pages that's called Lived Experience. And there are a number of sessions we've had where people living with dementia come and talk about what their experience is. And there's a couple, what I wish I'd known when I was diagnosed and what I wish I'd known tips and strategies. Those are from people who are living with dementia, and you may find them helpful in ways of kind of opening up some of those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And I'm just looking. Thank you, by the way, for so many people. There were a number of posts of people who have dealt with combative behavior and posted some suggestions. Um,
I saw another one. I'm just going to jump in again. And Adrian had asked how we can support someone with no communication to express themselves. She says she is physically able to show what she wants, sometimes can't understand the signs. So that's a great question because communication is impacted by dementia. So we can see both expressive aphasia and receptive aphasia. So whether they're having problem with language in or language out, it can be very frustrating for them. So in this case, if they are having trouble with communication, there's a few ways you can approach it, and a lot of times we do suggest using, gestures or physically showing them something because they may be having trouble comprehending words that you're saying. So if you're telling them something and they're not really responding or getting anything from it, try showing and using that as a way to continue communicating with them. Um, and you can ask them if they need help with telling a story if they're having trouble finding a word. So, having that difficulty expressing themselves is all about being a detective as well and using those gestures and communicating and meeting them where they're at to try and see what it is they're needing. But pictures can be really helpful, whatever adaptation that may work for your person. Recorded videos specifically on communication as well. So we have one called Understanding Communication Changes, and it helps us to understand what's specifically happening in the brain and how we can adapt and respond to those changes. Because the reality is, when someone is having those communication changes, it's very frustrating for them. So it can result in the responsive behavior. So all of this kind of ties in together. Thank you for that question.
just letting people know that, again, if you're looking for more support or looking for a specific support group, um, please call the First Link Dementia Helpline or Family Caregivers of BC, and the number is on the screen. The what I wish I'd known or did differently that I mentioned are not actually support groups. Those are, we have quite often, several times a year, we have on our webinars, lived experience webinars where people either with lived experience as a caregiver or lived experience as someone living with dementia come and talk about a particular topic. So both of those are recordings that are on our on-demand webpage under the lived experience section. And I'm going to just find the information on that.
Thanks, Lori. Yeah, I'll just keep our
Oh,
information up on the screen as we finish up. And again, if anyone has any remaining questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat box there. And sounds like we're kind of winding down, which is good. We're getting close to 3:30, and I'm so glad we've had this time to kind of answer any of those lingering questions. And I know a lot of you are probably absorbing all the information from today, and hopefully we'll be able to apply it.
yeah, Ashton, somebody says, how do I get an elderly parent resisting help with eating, bathing, going outside? So a variety of more specific situations. Do you have any ideas around that?
Yeah, for sure. So it depends on the activity, but we can go back to, our connect, don't correct approach and identify that emotional reality. So what are the emotions that are happening if someone is resisting? Is if it's with eating, for example, is something happening before the meal that's triggering an emotion? Um, and validating that. So maybe if you're giving them soup and salad for lunch, just validating, oh, I see you're not really enjoying the soup and salad, or I can see you're not wanting the soup, and being reassuring as possible And this can apply to activities as well. So, say, even if you're trying to go out for a walk, just say, I really enjoy doing this with you. I enjoy going for a walk with you. And it's really important that we do this for your health. And I really care about your health. So, that can apply to both um, eating or if there's another activity you're trying to engage in. So, using that reassurance that you're in this together. And using that redirection as well. So, whether it's providing something on top of that activity that is a quick thing that they enjoy, like a cup of coffee, maybe bringing coffee on your walk, or if you're having trouble with the eating, there's lots of strategies that you could try, but with eating, it can be quite complex. So maybe we're needing to adapt the food a little bit. Maybe the utensils are getting a bit difficult to use. Maybe they would prefer to have it in a mug, for example, for the soup. And maybe something that doesn't require as much chewing, if that's frustrating for them and they can't articulate to you, this is frustrating, I can't chew this, or I can't hold my fork properly, we may need to adapt how we're providing those meals. And maybe they're not liking the temperature of the food, maybe it's too hot or too cold. So, trying different things to see what works and what doesn't. And yeah, trying at different times too. So maybe, we say pick your battles. So if it's not working at a certain time, maybe try a half an hour later if possible. So, um, yeah, I hope that's helpful. We do have other resources on this. Like if there's issues with appetite or eating, we actually have a video on our on demand videos with Dr. Heather Keller and talks about healthy eating and nutrition with dementia. So hopefully that kind of helps answer that question and just kind of give some background on how we can approach, resistance to those really important things in daily life, like eating or getting out for a walk and staying active. Yeah, thank you all for coming, and I hope you learned some helpful strategies in this session. And please do go check out, if you haven't already, the other webinars in this series. So those are on our website. Please feel free to go check those out. And there's also lots of information and links in our helpful resources document. So please don't hesitate to use that. And don't hesitate to connect with the Family Caregivers of BC or the Alzheimer's Society of BC. If you have any further questions or are looking for programs or support, that's why we're here, is to help all of you out on this journey. And I just want to give a big thanks to everyone at the Family Caregivers of BC and my colleagues at the Alzheimer's Society of BC for all the work that was put into these presentations. It's just such valuable information for all the caregivers out there. So thank you so much, everyone, again for joining us. And we hope to see you at one of our future webinars on Wednesdays. So take good care and have a great rest of your day.